welcome everyone to WHL's first ever book discussion event featuring Game Misconduct, Hockey's Toxic Culture and How to Fix It by Evan F. Moore and Jashvina Shah. We are also thankful for sports journalist and Locked on Kraken podcast host, Erica A. Ayala, for joining us today to be a part of this discussion. Thank you, everyone, for talking with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I wanted to start off by asking, where did the idea for your book come from?
Evan, you want to go first?
Yeah. We have both separately have been, jotting down information and, in the freelance world, whereas, you have stories that don't get published. So you have the information and sometimes you already have filed a story and then sometimes people hit you back with information after the fact. But we found out individually we had been amongst ourselves talking about doing a book, and I saw Jashvina's tweet and about writing a book about hockey culture, and I DM'd her because I felt like I know her a little bit. I had been on our show. We have minded it's stuff or whatever. And, I told her, hey, I saw your tweet. I literally was thinking about the same thing. What would you feel about collaborating and, still with it? And kind of, took it off from there.
Oh, wow. So you guys, did you guys know each other before, personally, or just via online interactions?
Mostly.
Go ahead.
I was just saying mostly via online, but we had met in person. And I mean, we've talked before, I'd had Evan on my podcast and things like that. So.
That's awesome. So what do you guys hope readers will get from reading your book?
I think for me, a big hope that I have is just, obviously, we want people to be able to take away actionable steps that they can do in their everyday lives to sort of, to make hockey better. But I think too, a big part of it for me is just letting people know that they're not alone. Because I know a lot of the feedback that Evan and I have gotten is hey, that this is something that's really relatable to me, or I know that this is going to resonate with me because I feel this way, or I've gone through it. And I think just even being able to interview people and kind of, some people didn't necessarily have anyone to talk to about this, but they were feeling the same way. And I think on both sides, or on all sides, as if whether you're a fan or whether you're a player, just knowing that other people have the same sentiments that you do.
Right. So yeah, after I read it, even me being more of I describe myself as a casual fan of hockey. So I'm not completely invested in a lot of things, but I like watching, I enjoy the game. But, I've always noticed that people who are not involved in the hockey community whatsoever, they're always you like hockey? Hockey's for white people. You're not white. Why do you watch hockey? So when I read this book, I was wow, it's really sad that people who are not a part of the hockey community already have that notion that hockey is for white people only and men only. It's not for women. It's not for Black women, Spanish women, or anything like that. It's just for white boys and people that have money. So I definitely felt kind of seen in this book as well. So, and you guys covered a plethora of topics. It wasn't just, at first when I went into it, I thought it was just going to be about, the racism and everything else, but you covered ableism, women's hockey. You had a whole portion on how to fix it, transphobia, homophobia, there was a lot going on. And, some parts I was reading it and I was I had to put it down for a little bit because I was ooh, this is a lot. So I hope that when people read it, they really take it in, and don't just try to get through it just to be oh, I read it. I hope they really take in what you guys have written, because it's definitely, you put your heart and soul into this book. So I'm so happy that I got a chance to read it. So, now, as I was saying, there are 9 chapters total in this book, and the biggest portion is focused on racism on all levels in hockey. So recently, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with in the UHL, the Ukrainian Hockey League, player Jalen Smirek experienced racism during a game where opposing player Andrei Deniskin, if I'm saying his name correctly, made the racist gesture of peeling a banana and eating it. And right after that happened, he took a leave of absence, and then eventually he left the league and joined a German league. And the player, Deniskin, only received a 3-game suspension and the option to pay a very small fine. So in the book, you guys allude to countless of examples of how there are racial incidences like this that occur in the NHL and obviously elsewhere. And similar actions are taken where the offending player does not receive any adequate punishment. Why do you think this continues to occur?
Racism. That's one answer. I'm sorry. I know you're looking for. I am gonna give
No,
it.
you're fine. No, I like that
But
answer.
that's a great one from the jump. I mean, yeah, facts that Erica's doing. See, with the shrug there, and Erica's shrug. Yeah, that's what we're gonna call it now. But answer your question. I mean, it's you have people in charge and gatekeepers, whether they're journalists, players, parents, administrators, coaches. In many cases, in hockey, historically, they had no idea on what to do with anything outside of whiteness, and it's kind of how that is. I mean, we laid out a pretty good case of, why that is. And the thing is that, when people try to say, oh, saying toxic is like a harsh word and we're trying to quote unquote cancel hockey, but they never think about how we had a choice of content. There was so much content in that chapter. We left stuff out. I mean, the thing, we turned in that manuscript in January, and how much stuff has happened to hockey since then, and even after the book's been out, probably so the fact that when I personally have written about the sport in this way, and I would tweet like, hey, if you're someone person of color or what have you that's experienced some type of racism at the ice in the stands online, I'd love to talk to you specific story. And it always gets to the point where I had to turn people away. Like it was all parents, players, coaches, stuff they heard. It's when people want to, critique this book, they need to ask themselves why there was so much content to choose from in the first place.
Right.
That's pretty much where it's all at. That's the ball game.
Right. And Erica, did you want to comment on this as well?
I mean, I would add, yeah. I mean, I really don't know what else there is to say. But I suppose for those who maybe need a little help to understand and appreciate what we mean when we say the cause is racism. I think it's important for people to realize that racism has been permeated through all of our systems, all of our cultures. So you can perpetuate racism without ever feeling, thinking in your bones or anywhere else, or ever being called a racist. I also will say, and I've had to check myself on this if I'm keeping it 100%, but women, Black people, melanated people in general, because we operate in the systems of our society, we too are capable of perpetuating certain isms. Now, the difference is that we also experience those isms. But that's the one thing that I think is important to differentiate and understand, is that when you want to try and change racism in hockey, sexism in hockey, if you're not looking deep into quite literally everything from the rule book to where the money comes from, then you're not going to solve the problem.
Right. And Jashvina, did you have anything to add?
No, just when Erica was talking, I was like going to raise my hand and be like, I was actually just talking with, so one of the coaches in college hockey called me and we were chatting, and he had asked me the topic, I guess, about forgiveness and kind of about improving yourself. And so something that, when Erica was talking, like I thought about is like, I have 100% contributed to sexism and misogyny because I have been an internalized misogynist. Like if you look hard enough, you can probably find stuff I wrote on Nessun that's like has sexism in it. And I mean, so, to Erica's point, like just because I'm a woman doesn't mean I can't be sexist, because I 100% have been. And you have to really take a look at yourself and like what you've been doing and the things that you say. And, you have to be willing to critique yourself because, and I think, like internalizing xenophobia is a big thing too. I also was an internalized xenophobe. So, I mean, that's just what I was thinking about while Erica was talking.
And another thing I noticed, just as I mentioned before, being a casual fan, that when you look at other leagues such as the WNBA or the NBA, even NASCAR was stepping up, in 2020 with a lot of them. That's another sport that I'm really into. And I noticed that, hey, NASCAR is really not like a diverse sport. There's not a lot of diversity going on, but I enjoyed watching that sport. But even they stepped up in regards to recognizing social justice and putting that in their, commentary and everything else. And especially WNBA stepping up in a big way with the Say Her Name campaign and everything else. Why do you think, again, that the NHL is just so slow to really embracing social justice issues?
There are not enough Black women.
That's a good point. I agree with that. Well said, Erica. I definitely agree.
Well, I mean, because I think a lot of people use the WNBA as an example on this particular issue, but that is because women, but certainly Black women very specifically, not even just melanated women, but Black identifying women live on the corners and at the intersections of all of these systemic racist and sexist systems that have been created and thus perpetuated. So the cost of a WNBA player speaking up and speaking out against police brutality, qualified immunity, and on, the cost to their career, arguably, and you can check the record for some of the players that have said this, is not greater than the cost of them living in the world every day, of their children, of their nieces and nephews, of their brothers and sisters. So it's a non-starter for a lot of them. What I will say, though, is you still have to realize that the WNBA is a system, and there were negotiations that had to happen. What the players and the players' voice has been counter to what the WNBA's voice has been on this matter, if you really look it up. And I know we here to talk about hockey, so I'm not going to go too deep, but my point is that there is a give and take, especially when we want to operate within we'll use the term professionalism, although I think that's giving credit where it's not often due. But if we just were to assume that an entity that runs a professional, as in an elite level sport, is then going to act professionally in a business manner, there's a give and take that has to happen between the talent, in this case, the athletes, and the ownership and the staff of the league. Those conversations were forced by Black women and by Black players in the WNBA. Now, should that be the case? I would argue no. But until the players made the case that even the WNBA, who would, some might say is the wokest of woke leagues, had to have reckoned with themselves and is still going through it. So if we were to bring that to hockey, when we look at the players on the ice, even those that come from diverse backgrounds, they often are white passing. And that does make a difference when it comes to the stakes or even the proximity to racism, whether they've experienced racism, bias, bigotry, etc. Their proximity and the cost of their engagement with conversations that appear to be counter to the culture of hockey are very different than that of, in this case, a WNBA player.
Right.
For me, I think a big thing is also the people in charge have to be willing to change. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the biggest roadblock that you face, because I think, if Gary Bettman doesn't want to eradicate racism, it's not going to happen. And I mean, you look at USA, not just the NHL, but if you look at USA Hockey, if they cared about ending racism, they wouldn't have hired someone who called a player the N-word. And if they're not willing to change that, and if they're not willing to not only hire the right people, but also give those people enough power to do what they need to do to make things right, then it's a lost cause. And that's kind of the toughest thing that I look at, because I mean, if let's say I'm a person who is like, I can teach your players about this, but if you don't let me in the room, I can't do anything. So, yeah.
Evan, did you have something you wanted to add?
I'll say that, when you tell people about the book and they're like, oh, this is about hockey, I can't really, I don't know much about it or whatever. I always tell them, like, hey, this we talk about happens in all institutions. I mean, it happens in education, academia, journalism, law enforcement. In the medical field, like, I mean, any location you can think of, these issues are present, or at least bubbling up. So yeah, because but I kind of noticed over time with some of the stuff we've seen. Like, I'm someone that's pretty much into the NBA, but also the NHL, and you saw, like, because both sports, are playing basically at the same time. Where we have the Stanley Cup final and then the NBA finals, and you just kind of saw like this. Well, hockey fans, it seems like there's a repudiation of the NBA and the NHL, and even the WNBA. I mean, you think of sports fans who like to see themselves, and they go to the sport where they see more of themselves, which is hockey. And you see like some of the things that are said about these players, and they make it seem like that commitment and teamwork, and I guess like working hard at your craft is like exclusive to like hockey and white males. And we all know, like, historically has never ever been the case. And it's like you said earlier, a book is a lot. I mean, what we've heard from people about it, and a critical view is, there's a lot of information in there, and also they like the fact that how we kind of wove it all together. And we paint a big picture with this book. We take a big swing. I mean, we always talk about, like, we say a line in the book. We say hockey needs therapy or needs intervention, and if anyone's ever dealt with therapy and intervention, you have to talk about the past. You have to talk about everything that's gone on up until this point, because every time the rest of you probably heard this, like, especially after like last summer with George Floyd and COVID and Breonna Taylor and all these different, people that passed away. Even in my city was, gun violence, being a big, right wing talking point. Is, people always say like, hey, like, we know that's the past. We're gonna do now. Well, how are we gonna move forward? And you're like, oh, pump your brakes. We need to talk about, the past and how things have led to this point.
Exactly. Talk about where we've come from so that we can know where we need to go moving forward. I definitely agree with that. So shifting gears, I mean, Erica was talking about women. Now that I wanted to get into the women's hockey section that you guys had in this book. So me being a casual fan of hockey and just very, very new to the women's hockey scene in particular, the first thing I noticed coming into this space is that women's hockey in general just seems very divided. And I found that very odd. I was just like, okay, with it being more of a niche thing, like, not a lot of people, I didn't know about the NWHL until about 2 years ago, even though it came into light 2015. So it just seemed, I was like, why does everything seem divided? Like, no one seems to be on the same page here. So you guys mentioned in the book the entire debacle with the PHF, formerly NWHL, and Barstool Sports. So after that took place last year during the bubble season, we saw that there were many players, including U.S. Olympian Amanda Kessel being one of them, who supported Erica Nardini, the CEO of Barstool, by liking her video where she talked about her haters and everything else. And I believe she reshared it on her Instagram as well, which is how I saw it. And my question is to anybody here that's willing to answer is, why is it that the women's hockey space in particular can't seem to just come together and unite?
Yeah, women's hockey has just been really bad since, even like going back to when the NWHL was founded, it was just very divided between the CWHL and the NWHL. And like, for some reason, everyone just hated it. Like, there were people who were like, there were some people who were like CWHL fans who like really, it was just really nasty. And I mean, that hasn't really gone away, but a lot of it is very bizarre, and I can't really explain why everyone kind of hates each other, but I can say that unfortunately, after we submitted the manuscript, I think that stuff with Amanda Kessel had come out, because when I wrote, I don't recall putting that, like, that wasn't in the book because that all happened afterwards, which is unfortunate, because I wish that we could have been more clear that it's not just the NWHL, like the PWHPA has a lot of issues, like they're both really problematic and they both have really problematic people. The thing about women's hockey, I think that makes it so toxic, I guess, is that because they're women, they hide behind that identity as kind of like a shield to, we can't do anything wrong, which I think is what Erica Nardini does too. And I mean, we've seen so many examples of women's hockey players just, either being homophobic or being racist or, supporting Trump or things like that. And then it's always like, well, I'm a woman, so I marginalize myself. But as, Erica had mentioned before, that's not really how it works.
Right.
And I also think that it's sort of weird because the people who follow women's hockey are like from marginalized communities. But for some reason, like the players and, the leagues or the PWHPA, not league, but they still act like they're the NHL, and the fact that like they don't actually want to be good to marginalized fans.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I just got notification.
No, you're totally fine. No, it's fine.
So what was I saying? Something about, yeah. So it's kind of weird because you would think like, okay, the NHL kind of can sort of use that we don't want to alienate our racist fans as an excuse. But like when you look at the NWHL and the PWHA, it's like your fans are, they're non-binary, they're women, they're people, they're a lot of marginalized groups who like your sport and like support your sport. And yet you all still don't really, stick up for them when someone from Barstool harasses them or things
Exactly.
like that.
And I think to go off of what you were just saying, it's because it's not particularly unique to women's hockey. And the WNBA, I would argue, continues to have this problem. But women's sports, generally speaking, or majority women's leagues, do not cater to their fan base. They cater to whatever they deem to be a mainstream fan base. And regardless of the fact that, just to use an example, women continue to make up a large portion of the NFL fan base, as an example, we as a collective society deem sports to be uber masculine. And so there is a conformity of women or anyone to that. And so marketing dollars go to hitting the median, or the avatar, right? That's a big thing now in marketing, right? They hit the avatar. And so I would argue that women's hockey doesn't hit their own avatar. They want to hit the NHL's avatar. They don't even hit the international avatar. They want to hit the NHL avatar. So when you don't know your audience, again, never went to school for marketing, but people tweet at me about Business 101. So I did a little research on it because I just wanted to make sure I wasn't bugging. But Business 101, know your audience and don't give your audience what they don't ask for. So women's hockey hasn't quite figured that out. And to your point also about, whether you want to say Amanda Kessel, there's also an entire promotion. Barstool allegedly, apparently, is doing a hockey tournament, and it was Brianna Decker, one of the alternate captains.
You got me there. I was gonna bring that up, but I was like, we need to talk
about it. Go in the reprint.
What are we talking about? Brianna McLaughlin played in the NWHL, had an amazing game, won an Isabel Cup for the Buffalo Beauts, but and is now with USA Hockey as a goalie coach, also a supporter. So is it surprising? No. Also because the Barstool audience is a very they are a subsect, and a very loud subsect at that, of, again, the sports avatar. And so if you don't know your audience, you're going to cater to dollars that aren't the ones that currently actively are funding you. These aren't the fans that will continue to buy your merch, even though it comes late, if at all. It comes incorrect, if it's even available. So you're not catering to your avatar. You're chasing someone else's carrot. And that's a huge issue that I see in women's hockey. I would add what I said earlier, there are not enough Black women in women's hockey, but also we have to remember that when it comes to the money that funnels through. And I know that this was in the book, but hockey is an elite sport by design. There is a system in hockey, whether you're on the men's, girls, boys, men's, or women's, and it's getting worse, and also not a unique problem for hockey, but we're seeing younger and younger. We're asking children to specialize. Younger and younger, we're creating all of these, elite programs that's going to teach your kid to skate and get them a Division I scholarship, which is obviously going to win them 5 Olympic gold medals and get them into the professional leagues. So at 5 years old, that's the pipeline. And that money starts going into the pipeline. So I know that the economics of it was talked about. And I think there is there's a twinge of racism, even when we talk about the economics of who has access to sports, that we can get into or not. But I think it's worth noting that, yes, while economics is part of the issue and the elitism as far as buying into these systems at a younger and younger age, we also have to remember how we talk about that. Who has access to these boarding schools and prep schools where you are playing hockey, what seems to be 24/7, and maybe you have a tutor that goes with you on the road. These systems are inherently biased and essentially perpetuate racism as well.
I cannot agree more. And I thank you for bringing that up about the Barstool event that's coming up in April, because when I saw that, I was like, what's going on here? What is this about? So, and it just makes me, again, that's where, coming into the women's hockey space, was so confused when I saw PWHPA, NWHL, CWHL just folded. I'm like, what is what is this? I was like, what is going on? And that's, Twitter. I mean, I don't like using Twitter as an educational tool, but following you and Jashvina and a couple other people, I was like, okay, I'm kind of putting it together. And then if the end goal with women's hockey is to have that viable professional hockey league, why waste time with Barstool, and why waste time with, if it's just a weekend, they're not, I didn't hear anything about a league, you getting paid more money, doing anything. What are we doing? I was like, that just seems like, in my opinion, a waste of time. I was like, I don't understand.
Yeah, you're selling your soul to the devil and you're not really getting anything in return. So it's a very bad decision.
Right.
But, to Erica's point, they're chasing someone else's carrot. It makes
exactly. I think that was very well put, and it makes more sense put that way. They're just chasing something that doesn't make sense for the audience that they actually have. Because I was like, doesn't Barstool, a lot of their people, not support women's hockey in general anyway? So it's like, I'm not really understanding which way we're trying to go with this and why get involved with them. They're openly misogynistic, racist, homophobic, toxic culture, all the horrible things that they can be, they are, and they're proud of it, not hiding it. And you're choosing to just go that way. And I'm just kind of like,
bad business plan,
not clicking. And I'm like, it's not working out. So yeah, definitely. When I saw that, I think my mouth was open for about 2 minutes after watching the video, just kind of like, okay.
That was one of the things that I missed. I feel like I missed a lot after my dad's stroke. And that was one of the things that I wasn't completely aware of. And then someone told me and I was just like,
it was kind of like a blip on the radar. I mean, because I don't follow any of that, and it just kind of popped up and then it just went away. And I was kind of like, okay.
Well, I think part of the problem is too, and this ties into everything in general, but there's always something happening that you always forget about what just happened. Even, Evan mentioned, we have a ton of things that we can, look at, a ton of examples that we could include. When I was going through and writing, the part about sexism and sexual assault, I couldn't even remember. I was like, wait, didn't this guy do something? Didn't that? Because there's so many things. And then it's something happened. So we forget about it. The John Gruden emails came out. So we forget about what's wrong with Washington's football team. And it just keeps going like that. So even if you want to fight to, tell people not to leave the Blackhawks and what has happened there and what's being alleged alone, the next thing's going to happen in 3 days. The Montreal Canadiens are going to draft Logan Mailloux, and that's going to be a problem. And then how can you keep fighting everything at once?
Exactly. I completely agree. It always seems, and that's another thing I've noticed, is that something is always coming out. And as I was reading your book and getting through, all of the examples you had, the Jalen Smearick event happened. And I was just like, you gotta be joking. Like, when is this gonna not be a thing? Like, this is crazy. So yeah, I definitely agree. And before we start to get wrapping up here, in the last chapter of the book, you guys kind of pull it all together. You know, we take like a moment to just be like, whew, okay, here's how we can find some solutions to these issues. So one of the issues I've always noticed, me starting off as a young hockey player back in like 2004 and everything else, just the sport is so costly. And Erica kind of pointed to it earlier, just like that's just one of the barriers of the sport, is just that it's so costly. And there is, like, I agree with Erica that there is a tinge of, you know, bias and racism embedded in that. Because I mean, if the sport costs such amount of dollars just for one little showcase, and that does not account for the gas and the travel and the food and the hotel and all that you got to do.
Registration fee.
Yeah. And I'm just like, that's crazy. So, I mean, you talked about how there's organizations that help offset these costs, such as Black Girl Hockey Club and Snyder Hockey. But just as a whole, it's just too expensive. So do you see that changing at any time where they kind of address that issue?
I think you have to scrap the whole system, because the way that it's set up right now, you know, and so, you know, you mentioned Snyder Hockey, thinking about getting kids into the game at a young age. I feel like if you're kind of in the middle, because that, like, Snyder Hockey is for underserved communities. But if you're right in the middle, kind of what do you do necessarily? Because you don't really fit into either category. And I don't actually have an answer to that one yet. And as far as, you know, if you want your kid to succeed, like, you know, you want your kid to get a D1 scholarship so they can go win 5 Olympic medals and, you know, make the NHL or whatever. That whole system needs to be completely erased, because we can't have the prep schools. We can't have the hockey academies that are popping up in Canada. We can't have the kids paying for the showcases so that they can be scouted. We can't have the kids having to pay for skills camps, because a huge thing I've seen with kids who are even in college, like improvement from one year to the next year, is because they spend their off season working on their skating and skills camps. And people don't really, that those are costs that people don't always see. You know, they think about the equipment when I'm, you know, putting you in, you know, youth hockey or whatever, but they don't realize that it's a scam. The whole thing is a scam. Like, and it just can't exist like that. So someone's going to have to step in and say, like, I don't care if it's like, you know, you make it whatever, an NCAA violation to have players participating in showcases. I don't know what you do, because I haven't gotten to that yet, but you cannot have it the way that it is right now.
I agree. Erica, did you want to comment on this?
I really don't. I'm just nodding in agreement. I don't know what else there really is to say about that. I you know, I'm going to give my time.
I yield the floor.
Evan, did you want to add to anything? I feel like Jashvina put it in a very good way. She had that prepared. I like that answer.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I just think about, you know, me growing up being a hockey fan, and that there being a barrier between me, like, you know, like my interest in the sport to actually playing it, because, you know, I'm in Chicago and there aren't really any rinks in my area. I mean, only rinks in Chicago are maybe 5, 6, like year round, like in the city proper. Most of the rinks are in the suburbs where the money in the cloud resides. You know, as the one guy popped out the car, you might remember that video from a while ago, you know, where the money reside. I mean, you think about that, you remember that? Like, yeah, so someone like me who grows up, it's weird, because like the kid like me who grows up, who's in the south side of Chicago, and they're like, hey, I want to play hockey. Like, okay, so where'd this kid go? You know, like, I mean, my daughter plays. I mean, I do all right, you know, financially, and, you know, some of my cloud and everything else. So she's kind of better off than most kids, but at the same time, you know, like, when she gets there, she's only, you know, the only kid. And that's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, because as I mentioned in the book, you know, I was calling N-word by teammate in another sport. And I internalized that. And I knew even as a 14, 15-year-old that, like, who's going to do anything? My parents found out about it from reading the book, you know, and, you know, what I would like to see change is it's inevitability. Somebody gonna say something stupid to her one day. And you're just kind of like, well, I want her to, tell me or tell a coach or anyone else, so that's kind of stuff I was thinking about while writing the book. What's that, everybody? And also, we just need to have more access and need to have more rinks around, like, so kids can actually get into it, like, it's when even I've heard people since the book's been out, the book's been out in a couple days already. I heard so many people that's like, yeah, I want to like hockey, but and we all discussed the but this whole time we've been here, so that's definitely part of it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, I still don't know why my parents never kept me in hockey. I played street hockey for 2 years because, I mean, it was cheap. You don't really need much equipment to run around in some sneakers and a ball. But after that, I begged and begged to play. And I think part of it was just not wanting to play with boys because there was no girls. But I honestly feel like a part of it was because my parents knew that hockey was not for Black people at that time. I mean, we're talking like 15, 20 years ago almost, and there were no other Black kids on my team or any of the other teams that I played with. The coaches were not Black. So, I mean, I feel like in a way they kind of were telling me like, this isn't for you right now. So we're not going to continue you along in this sport. And I had to find something else to do. So, but I just wanted to wrap this up. And I mean, we had such a productive conversation in a short amount of time. And I am so thankful and grateful for all of you talking with me today. And I encourage everyone and all of our audience to go pick up a copy of Game Misconduct. And you can head over to triumphbooks.com/game misconduct and use code WHL25 to receive 25% off. Thank you, everybody, again for being with me here today.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all.
And
Thank you.
good job on the book. I loved it. Congratulations.